what kind of program can I help develop to help schools maybe with helping the kids kind of, we can't help that some kids maybe don't have a great upbringing and parents aren't very nice to them and they might have a bad childhood. Unfortunately, as a police officer, you'd see lots of those kinds of families and stuff. And so,
G'day everybody. Here we are, Changemakers. Sort of a little bit of a reboot because I initially did this recording with Clint a little while ago when I was streaming out to Flicks for Good, and at that stage I was running StreamYard, and it's maybe not StreamYard's fault, so I don't want to blame them completely, but we ended up with a really bad audio glitch, and it was so bad that I didn't even bother resharing it. The good thing for both myself and for you guys is that the conversation itself was great, and so I'm more than happy to actually do it again. So that's not a problem at all. So we're going to be talking with Clint Adams and talking about some pretty interesting stuff. So neuro-linguistic programming and how that can be used for healing and not for manipulation. The fact that, I guess, really, I suppose, digging into whether or not you're set in your ways. You know, there used to be a saying that a leopard never changes its spots or a cheetah never changes its spots. And I believe and hope, and we'll find out as we talk to Clint, that is one of those sayings that's been passed down from generation to generation and has potentially caused a lot more harm than good. I certainly am a big believer in growth mindset and have, had the good fortune of sitting in on some really fascinating talks with people talking about neuroplasticity and things like that. So I suppose if you're someone who struggles with some of your own behaviour at times, maybe it's anger, maybe it's jealousy, maybe you have a violent streak and you think that's how I am. Maybe your parents were violent, so and you're violent, you think that's it. Maybe you've been in and out of jail or those things, or maybe you just suffer from depression or don't have a great healthy self-image, and you also think that that's not something that's going to change. Well, this is a question mark that plagues many people, and it's a topic that I think it warrants digging into, particularly right now when so many people are in isolation around the world. So I'll grab Clint and we can start this conversation.
hey there, how are you?
Good, mate. I just thought I'd give you that little bonus applause as a thank you for coming back.
Look, thanks for having me back. I know that it was a bit disappointing with the audio, but that's all good. We kind of had a second. It's like a rerun, not a rerun. We get our trial run the first time, and this is the real gig.
That's right. Yeah, yeah. Well, either that, or I suppose on the topic of rewiring, we get to redo what we've done
Yep.
before. So, mate, hey, look, if hopefully I got that introduction correct, but it would be great if you could also give people a little bit of a rundown on who you are and what you're doing currently, and then we'll
Sure.
wind the clock back and talk about your background and what you've done that ultimately, I guess, has led through to what you're doing today.
Yeah, so what I'm doing today is probably more based around. So I wrote a book which has come out earlier this year. It's called "Lighting the Blue Flame," and it's based around suicide prevention and giving people, I guess, some initiatives and in helping how we can deal with bullying, how we can deal with things at a school level and at education level that I think is missing. I got a long history of working in HR, doing a lot of change management, working with adults more so. But obviously, I see these common themes and patterns coming through in terms of how they interact with people based on certain. I guess I call it an undercurrent. You mentioned something about people think it's a personality. To me, it's we build undercurrents up in our persona, our bodies, and all that kind of stuff. And what people don't realize is that you know a lot of stuff that may have happened a long time ago when we were young kids, we take in passively, things are happening around us. And then we kind of become who we become. And we don't really, I wouldn't say we don't give a lot of thought to it, but we don't really think about how we've come to be the person that we are, how all those thoughts, how all those comments, how all those interactions with other people all along the way have kind of shaped us to be who we are. Some of it's passive and some of it's not negative at all. Some of it's, nasty things happen to people and it changes their path. I've worked with people in PTSD. So just to give a bit of my background,
Yeah.
I've worked, I've studied psychology. I did a science degree in psych when I left school. I then went into work for the Victoria Police with the hope of kind of getting into the psych unit down the track. That was kind of my aim originally. But then that didn't happen. I won't bore you with details, but I went more in and studied more in rehabilitation counselling, like proper counselling, working one-on-one with people who've got some issues and stuff like that. So over the years, I went back to the police, worked with police who'd had PTSD or had injuries and they couldn't deal with it from a psychological perspective and all that kind of stuff. And then over the years, I've used that psych background, that counselling background to kind of change, help people more from a program perspective. And this is adults. This is also programs I did with police where we were looking at how we could help the police, not get overawed by certain situations where, they'd be maybe physically arresting somebody and the person's now not doing it, and then they still overstep the mark from a violence perspective. The Black Lives Matter incident probably gives a good example of that, where, the guy was subdued, he wasn't violent anymore. Yes, there was all these issues, but what's happening in their heads as the police officer when you're fearful or something like that. And America's a very different beast to Australia with, the amount of firearms and stuff. So
Yeah.
when people are feeling threatened, then things happen.
Yeah.
One of the themes that I have through the work environment, and I've seen a lot, and that's why I've written the book to kind of help with that earlier on, is seeing it. People who generally have a fight or flight undercurrent. So, when we talk about someone who's maybe very timid, very shy, won't kind of interact, there's an element of a fear in there from their personality. Things may have happened and they don't want to interact with people, so they withdraw. That's their coping mechanism to not interact with people. And then on the flip side, you've got the people who, they've got a lot of anger because of what's happened and they can't deal with it, so they just get angry and then they act out in a number of different ways. Family violence, it's just one way. People turn to alcoholism, drugs, all that kind of stuff. And so, unfortunately, when I worked in healthcare a few years ago, I had a lot of access to information about a particular area that we covered. And I was just alarmed by how many young kids were on antidepressants, how many were, attempted suicide, how many on, all this kind of stuff. And you're thinking 12 and 13-year-olds, well, what are they really concerned about? So back then I started to think about, well, what kind of program can I help develop to help schools maybe with helping the kids kind of, we can't help that some kids maybe don't have a great upbringing and parents aren't very nice to them and they might have a bad childhood. Unfortunately, as a police officer, you'd see lots of those kinds of families and stuff. And so for me, it was about thinking, well, what can we do once the kid gets into primary school? At least, if they've had a bad couple of years or early years with the parents, hopefully there's some stuff we can do more proactively to kind of build their resilience, teach them more about how their brains, their bodies, and all that kind of work together with your unconscious mind, your conscious mind, your body, and then your emotions. They all kind of bundle up together, but how we kind of structure certain routines at school to enhance some of those things. So that's kind of how the book kind of began. I did it as a school program initially. I tried to talk to politicians back then. This is in Victoria when I still lived down there. But unfortunately, sometimes politicians aren't subject matter experts and it's not their thing to know about. So, that they, no disrespect to any of them, but, they have their own agendas. They go, I want to find something that's going to get votes. So, sometimes the funding doesn't get to the people that probably, could really do some real good. And so sometimes they choose things that, might be someone they know or someone that they know who also knows someone else. So, sometimes those funding don't go where they should. So, look, mine never went anywhere. And so I changed my tact and decided to write a story and kind of use the book and the story to just get the message out there. For me, it was about saying, well, it's kind of challenging the education department. I think there's some things that the education is a long way behind in from a mental health perspective. Like if you think about physical health, for example, we all know about nutrition. Even when I was at high school, and I'm showing my age, I was in the 80s and 90s. So,
Yeah.
but not even the 90s. I was already at uni in the 90s. But we got taught about nutrition. You got taught about sport. You got taught about your physical health, carbs, protein, all that stuff. Very little about how your brain actually operates. Once you get into kind of late high school, you might choose psychology as an elective, but it's never really been considered as just general part of every week curriculum kind of activities. And there's lots of things we can do that actually can help with that. So like if we use the physical analogy, like okay, about you got to cut you got to get your cardio up, or you got to do weight training, or you got to cut out this, and that'll give you a healthier perspective. Well, mental health is the same. There's things that we can do, but understanding why we do it is the key, where people can actually look at what other things you can do for activities. Like, a good example is, why would bringing dogs into a prison help the prisoners actually feel better about stuff? Well, their serotonin levels go up, the oxytocin levels go up, and they're all good kind of natural drugs in your own body. So there's just one example, right? There's lots of things that can give you the same feeling, like, going bushwalking. Why does that make you feel good? Well, again, the surroundings, what you're taking in, better air, all that kind of stuff adds to your mental state. Mindfulness is another one. What mindfulness does is really stop, slowing down your brain waves. And so when you're in that heightened state, your brain waves are actually quite high. So you're in a beta state. So all these things, and understanding all these things, can kind of make you think about, well, what's the best program for me? I'm not necessarily a runner, so I don't want to get endorphins, but I can do this. And there's all these things. So for me, it's about, people understanding more about those things, and then kind of, working on different ways to get things to work for them. And I just don't think there's kind of enough of that information getting out there. There's a lot of information out there, but actually getting it and making it practical for people is the key part of this.